Crank it up.
Good evening. My name is Ken Bell, and I'm hosting this night of our Health and Wellness Night for the DBSA group. And tonight we have Pat Martinelli and Philip Konecny. Is that correct?
Konecny here, Slovak.
Okay.
Phil is what I go by.
Okay, good. That's good. Philip.
Phil K.
I'm Scottish, so. We have this wellness series the first Monday of every month, and we're trying to vary the different subjects and stuff. And tonight we have DBT, and they're from Cairn House, which is in Everett, and we've sent a list around for everybody to sign. Please sign that if you can. There's also a feedback sheet here in case you want to fill it out and give it to us afterwards. And there's also a little box of money back there in case anyone wants to donate any money for the, for us DBSA people.
Yeah.
So
drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, sure. If there's any questions or anything, we might as well get started, and let's do it.
Thanks, Ken.
Yes.
So I'm Pat Martinelli. I've been providing mental health services in Snohomish County for about 20 years, and was for a very long time in the nonprofit sector working at Compass Health. I went back into private practice a couple of years ago. I have been practicing and providing DBT for about 10 years now. So that's my background, briefly.
I'm Phil Konecny, or Phil K, or Phil, or that guy. I've been in mental health for 20 years, but actually a number of those years I was in television, which I think needs maybe a good dose of mental health. Treatment, therapy. I worked with violent sex offenders for a number of years, and at the Source Child Center for a number of years as well. With the violent juveniles and non-like terrorists, that facility is no longer open. And I also went into private practice a couple of years ago. And Pat and I are both certified in DBT therapy, having had attended Lane Peterson's seminar, 4-day seminar. But Pat has an extensive background in DBT therapy, and it's an effective a program that we're beginning to realize has applications that exceed the initial, I think, vision that Marshall Linehan had back in '87 when she produced her doctorate work at the University of Washington. And that'd be kind of a brief synopsis of what I've been up to.
So DBT originated with cognitive behavior therapy. DBT, by the way, stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy, and Marshall developed it out of the University of Washington as a way of dealing with borderline personality disorder, or people who do a lot of self-harming, suicidal kinds of behaviors. But she pulled together practices from around the globe, not just therapeutic things, but Buddhism, a lot of Eastern philosophy she incorporated into it, and went back to a philosophical perspective. Dialectics go back to ancient Greece. And so when we look at DBT, it looks like it's very innovative, but it's also very derivative. And in a way, that's what DBT is all about. It's about the balance of opposites. In our lives, we struggle with complex ideas because things that shouldn't exist at the same time always do. And so when we look at DBT and we look at that standard of dialectics, we understand that nothing is absolute, and that value and wisdom are unique to each individual, and we don't ever want to overlook those things that a person brings to their own treatment. When Linehan first developed DBT, it involved individual therapy, groups twice a week, 24/7 crisis coordination, and weekly consultation. So it was very intensive therapy provided for people who would otherwise be hospitalized. So it was developed that way. But there's been a lot of research over the years in the core skills set that DBT teaches, which is mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. And what people have found is that those skills and the way that they're compiled and presented offer such a good skill set for all people in terms of learning to live in balance, learning to find effective ways of managing their lives. And so DBT grew, and I studied with Marcia back in the 90s, then with Kathy Moonshine out of the University of Oregon, and then with Lane Peterson out of the University of Kansas. And I joined that group that said that we don't need to keep DBT in this little box, that we have these wonderful skills that are invaluable for many, many people. And so we then present DBT in that out-of-the-box way. We don't adhere to Marcia's model in that we don't do crisis management, we don't do 24/7 case consultation, that sort of thing. We provide a skills training for people so that they will learn each of these skills. And we provide a 6-week series. So each skill is taught for 6 weeks so that you have an opportunity not only to come to group and learn the skill, but we send you home with homework so that you're going home and you're trying things and you're coming back and you're saying, well, this piece works for me and that piece doesn't work for me. And we discuss it in terms of the group, what pieces are good and what pieces aren't feasible, because everybody has their unique way of living their lives. DBT is really about balance and effectiveness. So when we look at dialectics, we're looking at those things like what we want and what we need, feelings and thoughts, problems and solutions, wanting to have fun but having responsibility, being right, making mistakes. So all of those things that exist. And the core belief is that everybody is doing the best that they can, but need to do better. So there's that constant tension that seems to go on in terms of our lives. And DBT helps us find a balance in that tension. There are core dialectics that we address in our training. Acceptance and change. That idea that we have to accept many things, but that doesn't mean that we cannot change. That we validate people's experiences, at the same time challenge those same experiences, challenge ourselves to move out of those experiences. How we find the balance between emotion and reason, what in DBT is called wise mind. That fact that we must have and must experience our emotions and our feelings, and we also have to bring our thinking to bear. We can't overthink and we can't overfeel. So how do we find that balance? Sitting with our experience, but also being problem solvers. Knowing that in relationships, we want to be available to the people we care about, but we also have to set limits. So it really is learning skills to find this balance in our lives. And one of the other really basic premises of DBT is a non-judgmental stance. That idea that we must live our lives without judging others or being self-critical of other people. And how we step out of that thinking is, again, some of the skills that we practice. We avoid all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking. It's really trying to find that middle ground, that middle path that allows us to be most effective. You know, in DBT, we don't promise that you're going to be happy. You know, we don't make promises that about anything. What we offer is a skill set that you take out into the world, and what we have found is that people who begin to live a DBT approach, a very mindful, very centered, very balanced approach, are being more successful in the way they manage their emotions, in how they approach crisis, just in getting through their day-to-day life. And so that's a lot of what we do. You want to talk about the skill sets, Bill?
I'll break down the 4 skill sets as Pat shared. They're 6-week modules, meeting once weekly, a little over an hour. Our first skill set is mindfulness. Pat touched upon it. It's that state of balance between our thinking and our feeling. It's the effort to live in the now, to learn to focus on one thing at a time. You know, there's a lot of hype on multitasking, which I think is a formula for actually not doing any one thing very well. And another problem with multitasking is we don't have time to sit with our feelings about any one particular thing we're experiencing. Rather, we are basically left to sort it out later if we get enough sleep. So we want to separate judgmental thoughts from the actual experience. In our life, when we experience events, judgmental thoughts fuel overwhelming emotions. And so learning to identify judgmental thoughts and reject them, whether they are pulling up past feelings that are associated with these type experiences where we make generalizations about the event rather than taking and really identifying what's specifically going on in this event. And then what emotions are we experiencing associated with this specific event? And being willing to realize and recognize that we might have ambivalent feelings. We might have many feelings that are even contradictory. We can love somebody and hate them, and yet and those feelings can both be brought to bear in a single event or experience. So the exercise, we encourage our participants to identify their feelings and also identify the negative and judgmental thoughts that they associate with those feelings to help sort them out. It's not just negative feelings from the past that can come up and kind of crush us, but also it's the notion of, we call it catastrophizing the future. When we, this has happened and it means so much more, this is going to wreck everything. Well, maybe only if we let it. We can't assume anything about the future. And so separating, feelings from facts and identifying our thoughts and our emotions, that we might develop this wise mind, the ability to sit in awareness of the moment. Marshall Linehan calls the wise mind, or refers to it as similar to intuition. Rather than being driven by an emotional state, having our emotions drive our behaviors, or having negative automatic thoughts color our communication and drive our behavior. Rather, in balance, in awareness of the moment, having your intuition at your disposal, the ability to trust your inner voice. We start each of our group sessions with 4-square breathing. Has anybody heard of 4-square breathing? Okay, we've got one. All right. 4-square breathing is really just the mechanics of taking a slow, deep breath to the count of 4, holding for the count of 4, exhaling to the count of 4, 4 times. Marshall Linehan recommends that you do it with your eyes open. I think we do it a lot closed. I think participants, yeah, absolutely. Participants oftentimes will just kind of automatically close their eyes. That's fine. But the notion is to calm yourself. The long-term, longitudinal effort is to change your brain chemistry. To rather, when you're faced with overwhelming emotions or distress or conflict, rather than firing into reaction mode, rather deliberately calming yourself. This is part of the development of wise mind. We also, in this exercise, practice body awareness, feeling where we feel stress, feeling the chair that we're sitting upon, feeling the chair resistance against our weight, our feet upon the floor. Awareness of our surroundings, listening for noises outside of the room, being aware of the noises inside of the room, being aware of our environment. This is all done in that effort to pull us into the moment, into the now. We encourage a single-mindedness in what we do, and we do little exercises like we might pass out little goldfish crackers, but not like a handful, because we don't want you to mindlessly eat them. We want you to mindfully eat them. I suppose we could pick something that maybe had, its fragrance would be a little more evocative, but instead they're goldfish crackers anyway. And so we encourage folks to not just, eat their 4 little goldfish, but rather experience the goldfish. Smell it, feel its texture, put it in your mouth. Be in the moment and experience that. And we encourage them to use this mindful eating approach in their actual daily lives. That rather than when we sit down, we're just shoveling in food in front of the TV or to run to a meeting. Instead, rather that we mindfully experience our food. Some wonderful things happen. You eat less. And it's actually an experience that helps transition during your day. Another neat component of avoiding multitasking is the component of emotion containment that you get back. Emotion containment being that when you experience something, it is good and right that it elicits emotional response, but that emotional response should be relevant, provide relevant feedback to the experience, and it should reinforce your understanding of the experience. But if we're multitasking and we're always charging around and handling 3 things at once and fielding every question thrown at us and keeping all the endless media distractions at our disposal blazing, when we have feelings, they probably aren't as profound as they need to be helpful, to provide us useful information. So we practice, we identify and sit with our feelings. We practice identifying our negative automatic thoughts in this effort to separate our thoughts and our feelings that we might get useful information. And in that balanced state, hear our intuition. This is the larger effort to reach a state of radical acceptance or acknowledgement. By separating our thoughts and feelings, we can identify or be aware of precisely what is bothering us without negative judgment or self-criticism. And it allows us to gather up and manage overwhelming emotions and distress, and hopefully put the event in its place for us to put the event or the experience behind us if necessary. So radical acceptance or acknowledgement is that notion of identifying the issue as it is without loading it up with the judgment and self-criticism that oftentimes comes along with it. Radical acceptance is also a kind of a window into the realization that there is stuff simply out of our control. There is stuff, very possibly in our lives, that is painful, that we can't do anything about. And yet, it's in our lives. It causes us distress. It may be there tomorrow. And so how do we manage that? And I love the sort of the larger notion of DBT, which is that Marsha Linehan referred to it as cognitive behavior therapy with the inclusion of acceptance as an important component. In other words, we can process our experience, but the truth is there's sometimes components in our life that suck, for lack of a more gentle vernacular, that we need to manage ourselves in that experience. We need to manage our feelings and how we manage our lives.
It gets to this basic reality that you probably didn't create the problems that are in your life, but you have to solve them. And that's often the bottom line, is, for whatever reason, those things that you're dealing with in your life might be, biological, they might be environmental, it could be from a relationship that you're in. But regardless of where they came from, you're left with the need to solve them. And DBT is really all about finding that ability to accept that and effectively then become a problem solver.
I love that. Distress tolerance is the second module. It's fairly self-explanatory, I suppose, if we think about tolerating distress. We are going to have distress in our lives if there are conflicts in our values and the life that we're trying to live. We may have distress in coming at us in a host of forms from our environment. How we respond to that is the focus of our DBT effort. Pat shared that the inception of DBT by Marsha Linehan in '87 was to help with, the parasuicidal, the self-mutilators, the self-injury, borderline personality disorder population of folks. And one of the components of distress tolerance is to first take actual harm out of the equation. And so folks that are experiencing or exhibit self-harming behaviors, we encourage, rather than cutting yourself or any other actual harming behavior, maybe snap yourself with a rubber band, hard. Make sure it competes with cutting yourself. Holding an ice cube. I don't know if anybody's ever held an ice cube. It'll get your attention. It feels like fire. I don't know. I tried it. Use a red marker and draw as though you are cutting yourself, and that you see the red, and you get that satisfaction of aliveness of this unhealthy behavior without the actual self-injury.
There's just a little bit. Often when we talk about mindfulness and distress tolerance, they overlap, and that's true of all DBT skills. But if we look at mindfulness, we look at this as kind of our overall approach to life. And distress tolerance is for those times when the shit hits the fan. In other words, that there are those moments that are out of the norm. Everyday life is always a bit stressful, but there are those situations that compound and take everything from us. And so when we're in those moments, it isn't going to be enough to be mindful, that there are other things that you're going to need to bring to bear, and that's what distress tolerance is all about. It starts with that idea that, all right, this one is big, and I'm not going to deal with it right now. So we learn to distract, we learn to soothe ourselves, we learn to calm ourselves so that we bring our best efforts to bear in the situation. So it's not avoidance. So there's just this slight difference between mindfulness and distress tolerance. And we ask, I tell people, I said, you want to be mindful more often than not. Because you don't ever want to bring a skill into your life that you try so hard that you you feel like you're a failure. So it's also, because DBT is so much about balance, that you really want to think of, I'm going to be mindful more often than not. And being able to recognize that the more you're mindful, the more you can affect your chemistry, and we strive for integrating our minds and our bodies again, because often when we become distressed, we really separate our understanding of ourselves and hyper-focus on ourselves physically or ourselves emotionally, and we never stay integrated.
So ideally, we'd like you to just, the population we work with, to distract themselves with pleasurable activities, soothing themselves through the window of our five senses. So whether it's sight, like literally, if getting through the moment is just looking at the interesting visual pattern on a book, just to escape for that moment of overwhelming distress or emotions. Smells, whether fragrant candles, citrus fruit. I like the smell of the ocean, but you can't always get to the ocean in time. Hearing, one of our clients actually suggested, we always say, choose music that is a profound distraction from the distress. One of our clients actually had a trick that I liked, that he would only listen to 30 seconds of a song on his electronic player, and then before he was getting into it, which might bring up a whole host of powerful and clear emotions, rather every 30 seconds just advancing it into another song. And he said that by the fourth song, by the fourth 30-second little sampling, he may have forgotten what initially overwhelmed him or distressed him. And touch, physical touch is electric, taste. There are a number of healthy, self-soothing behaviors.
When people do distress tolerance, we help them build distress tolerance boxes. And so everybody goes home with a nice size box that's filled with things that appeal to your senses. Candles, potpourri, hard candy, photographs, lots of things. So we help people, rocks. I hand out rocks to everybody. Have a fine collection of stones. And so it's a beginning for people to put together things that they can keep to hand for those really stressful moments. You create it when you're calm, so that when you're not, you can just grab your box and there will be things in there that help you get through the moment.
I put fishing tackle in my distress tolerance box. It makes me feel better. It does. I look at it, I feel better. That's what it's for. And we also advocate distract with service to others. Helping someone else helps get you sometimes out of your own distress, out of your own funk. The third module? Third module is emotion regulation. Emotion regulation is choosing healthy and appropriate thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, rather than being pulled into a reaction cycle, or what we call a reaction cycle. Primary feelings are our initial emotional response to an experience or an event. The secondary emotion is where we're trying to influence the choice of the response to the primary emotion. We all have primary emotions. That's good and right. It makes us human. What we do, how we interpret that primary emotion, the thoughts, behaviors, and actions we take determine in large part whether that primary emotion is pain followed by Lord knows how much suffering, or pain, and then choosing alternative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as a, I was going to use the whiteboard really quick, as a alternative, a healthy alternative. So we call this the reaction cycle. And I just feel like it's useful, a useful visual. We don't want to react. We want to respond to our environment. We want to respond with a thoughtful, mindful response. And so we have emotions that can trigger behaviors. Those behaviors can in turn trigger negative automatic thoughts. Those negative automatic thoughts can color how we feel about ourselves. And this can fire in either direction. But the important point is that if we simply react, we're perpetuating potentially negative outcomes. So I'll just use a classic example. My negative behavior was I drank too much. Alcohol. My negative automatic thought is I'm a loser. My emotion is I keep doing this and I feel hopeless. Okay, this is a pretty fast self-firing reaction cycle. I start feeling hopeless. I think maybe if I see some friends, it happens my friends also drink, I'm back to repeating the negative behavior. When I feel hopeless, it's hard to get out of the mindset that I'm just I'm a loser. When I'm feeling like a loser, what's it matter if I have another drink? So this is the reaction cycle and why it's and clearly counterproductive. We want to respond rather than react. And first thing a person might consider is alternative behaviors. Change the water. Visit an AA meeting. Alternatives to negative automatic thought. Rather than the opposite, I'm not a loser, might be, I have redeeming qualities.
Sometimes I make bad decisions. You know, it's really trying to avoid all or nothing thinking. That's, key.
And Pat mentioned at the beginning that DBT is really the discipline or study of opposites. Just going to the opposite emotion, rather than holding in your heart hopelessness, rather holding in your heart hope. It's a funny thing that happens with brain chemistry. When you hold an emotion, a funny thing happens. It's almost like the energies of your mind start to align with how to accomplish that goal. any one of these alternative behaviors, I promise will interrupt the reaction cycle. And with regard to emotion regulation, the effort is to start new behaviors or healthy behaviors as an alternative to repeating past learned responses.
We had a teenager at a group a couple of weeks ago. She asked, what's the difference between feelings and emotions? And I was so excited that she asked that, because it's a kind of a core concept. It's the idea that feelings are this immediate reaction we have to the environment, and the emotion is much more complex. Emotion is when we have the feeling, but we've got now the thought that's going with it, and we also have kind of our physical response to it. So the emotion is much more complex. And I told her is that you're going to have the feeling, and you're not even going to have names for it. You just experience it. As soon as you can give it a name, and we encourage people to really think about emotions as very complex and not to go to the happy, sad kind of place, but really look at the complexity of emotions, guilt, shame, frustration, annoyance, all of those things. When you can give your emotion a name, then you start to have a degree of ownership. When you have ownership, you can decide whether you want to keep it or get rid of it. Now, not that it's that easy and you do it that quickly, but that's the core concept in emotion regulation, is that sense that oh, now I know what it is I'm experiencing. I feel it in my body. I know what thoughts are going with it. I recognize its complexity. It doesn't fit where I want to be. So I'm going to do something about it. And so it really is that understanding that the feelings we're not going to control. Feelings are that response, that message that our system is giving us about what's going on in our environment. Emotions, we do regulate. That's the additional complexity. So that's when we talk about emotion regulation, we really talk about the developed understanding of moving from feelings to the complexity of our emotions and what we do with that.
I liken it sometimes with the steps of identifying our feelings that build our emotion and identifying our emotions as getting a handle on it, putting a handle on your feelings so that we can manage. Our minds want to identify patterns. Patterns are useful, they are helpful in how we manage our lives and our feelings. The fourth module is interpersonal effectiveness. Interpersonal effectiveness is taking your internal skills and applying them in the communication process. We are social creatures. How we view ourselves is in large part created by the experiences that we have had over our lifetime of our interaction with others. And so we encourage our folks to use assertiveness plus listening to improve their negotiation with others. It's not just about getting our needs met. We also need to respond to the needs of others. If we're mutually responding to each other's needs, there's a better chance that we're going to have a successful negotiation. The trick is listening without judgment, not having preconceived notions about what the other party's going to say or why they say it. Think of it more as a discovery, as an exploration of the other, to really understand where they're coming from. Don't assume anything. It's funny how when you muster up the courage to step out of an assumption and ask someone, why or what's the reasoning behind their position, how they oftentimes will surprise you with a position that you didn't see coming. That's useful information. And so the same principles of DBT that we've been applying to ourselves with regard to not judging others and not hamstringing ourselves with self-criticism also applies in our communication with others. We don't want to assume, we don't want to judge, we don't want to have negative attributions of self-criticism. Or the notion, the fundamental attribution error that they're doing the same thing, or assuming that they're doing what they're doing based on your weights and measures, but rather give the other individual the opportunity to provide their own information, their unique information, and listening then without judgment. Listen with single-mindedness. Don't allow distractions. Be in a mindful state. Make sure that, if it's important, that the radio's down, the TV's down, and make sure that you're mindful and aware of, as to the best of your ability, what information is being exchanged. Not projecting your fears or feelings on others. And so we hope to put in possession of our attendees the key interpersonal skills of first, know what you want, preferably before you go into the discussion if it's important. Being willing to ask for what you want, listening to the other's needs, and then negotiating a win-win.
We also, when we're working on interpersonal effectiveness, we want people to recognize how important it is that you always maintain your own self-respect. That being in a relationship is always reciprocal, but it's easy when we're particularly vulnerable to go overboard and take on roles that are in conflict with our value system. So it's so very important that we maintain our value system in a relationship and that we maintain our self-respect as well. And so that's key to interpersonal effectiveness, is that sense of respect, not just respecting the other person, but maintaining our own self-respect as well. So we want to always make sure that we're managing that effectively.
I think it's useful to familiarize and be willing to revise your values, to know who you are. It's very easy to trudge through life and assume that who we are, we already know, but who we are is really sort of a melange of who we were raised to be and who we have learned to be. Oftentimes, some of our overwhelming feelings are rooted in some of our deepest learned behaviors. And so having a willingness to reconsider who we are, be willing to revise our value system, not to suit others necessarily per se. I think a person might want to reconsider certain components of their value system if they found their value system completely ineffective in the world, but more because as adults, as we learn, as we grow, we have our own weights and measures. We don't have to simply, again, react in ways that we have stored deep in our self, but rather be thoughtful, respond, and be willing to navigate in the grays. Avoid the black and white, off and on reasoning that often comes along with many components of our value system. It's a kind of a spooky notion to maybe navigate in the grays. It's much easier to be black and white. It's much easier to be off and on. It can end an awful lot of discussions very quickly, but that might not necessarily be in our best interests. And so having that willingness to kind of let go of the black and white thinking, be willing to consider some of the shades of gray that surround a particular situation might make us more effective in the long run and might make our experience less overwhelming, less distressing.
We also teach validation, which is such a good skill. It's the ability to understand that people have their own perspective and that it can be different than yours. And that when you validate that fact, just to validate the fact that someone is experiencing a situation differently than you are, it takes the relationship a step further. And so we teach some basic communication skills, we teach validation, we teach good listening. I always present to people when we're talking about interpersonal effectiveness the idea that if you are listening, when you begin to frame your response, you've stopped listening. And so to slow ourselves down and to catch ourselves when you're starting to come up with that answer in your head, recognize that you've stopped listening and go back to it. Go back to being willing to slow a conversation down so that you hear everything a person has to say. Most people take a while to build up to that important thing that they want to share. You know, they're building their courage, they're making their argument. What we'll find is that the most important thing someone has to say often comes at the very end. If you're listening to them and about halfway through you're starting to frame your response, there's a good chance you're going to miss the essential piece. And so it's one of those listening skills that we really talk about and we really practice.
And that component of mindfulness, the willingness to experience the moment and what the moment is sharing with you, that there's not a rush to judgment or a preconceived notion being pressed upon the situation.
Do you need to?
I can go 5 more minutes.
Okay. Phil has a client, so yes, now
So,
before I'm done.
We can go to 8:30, did you know that?
Yes, I thought I'm going to be here, but Phil has to run.
He has to run up. Okay,
Yes.
then you do have time for questions.
I'll have plenty of time for
Great.
questions.
Thanks.
should we go to questions?
I actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, I know that this group deals primarily with depression and bipolar disorder, and I wanted you folks to know that actually DBT, there's been a whole DBT program developed for those with bipolar disorder, and it's a workbook we use. Frequently recommend these workbooks to people who come to our presentations. But I wanted to talk about, I think, the kind of people the kind of challenges that DBT benefits. I think that whenever you're emotionally vulnerable, that is a kind of a predisposition to a certain response. And so that in itself makes maybe DBT a good skill set for you. Emotional vulnerabilities are often biological, but that doesn't mean that you don't have them. You do, and they're exacerbated by trauma and loss and frustration and the misunderstanding of the world in response to you. So, you know, in learning DBT, it also gives you a different way of managing other people's response to your emotional vulnerabilities. I think that often there's a chronic invalidation of people who live with, you know, this emotional vulnerability, and that constant invalidation is very difficult. So learning to validate yourself, learning to suspend your own criticism and overlook judgments from other people becomes very important, and then that's another skill that you can, you know, learn and practice when you've learned your DBT. And that emotional vulnerability often leads to escape or avoidant behaviors, and those aren't always effective as well. And how we manage our environment really is often tied into that emotional vulnerability. So I think that DBT just offers this great set of skills for managing so many aspects of your life.
I want to thank, we're going to continue, I just am going to dismiss myself. I want to thank you for the opportunity to get a chance to present to you folks. And I apologize, I have to run.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Great.
So questions about our groups, about DBT specifically? Yeah.
Do you do any role playing? Like,
Yes, actually we do. Because each skill we present in a 6 weeks module. You know, over that 6 weeks we do a lot of learning skills, but also practicing them. And the role playing is an important part of that. We don't allow the sharing of what we call war stories in DBT. It really is about, so people aren't coming to share the latest horror of their week. They're coming to learn a skill. Now they can come in and say, briefly, how would I use a DBT skill to approach this kind of issue?
and then work through it.
And then we help people work through it. We have a lot of worksheets that include a lot of role playing, particularly in our emotion regulation and our interpersonal effectiveness. So we do a lot of that, how different people might react in different situations, and we role play that. Yeah.
Just, could you briefly repeat the questions? So
Oh yes.
People
She
out
asked
there.
if we
Yeah.
role play.
Yeah,
So if we do some role play, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I will.
thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else?
How many are in a group when you do role playing?
Our groups generally run, they can be small from 4 and they can go all the way up to, we have a large group right now, we have 9. Generally we don't run that many. But our groups run an hour to an hour and a half depending on how much work we need to accomplish. We don't set ourselves to a 60-minute time slot because people come with homework. We send homework and with the expectation that you're going to try some of these things and come back and tell us whether they work or don't work for you. So it becomes important that you bring that work back so that we have an opportunity to look at what's working or not working for you.
How would you see teaching DBT on an individual versus a group setting? I presume you do both.
Yes, and I do both. I have often done, people can't come to group, and I've also provided DBT individually for people who are involved with the Department of Corrections. And so they'll come and they'll do DBT with me, and I'll give them certificates of completion. So I can offer, we do offer DBT on an individual basis. You know, I'm getting a lot of referrals from DSHS for people who need a lot of the core, because DBT is an evidence-based practice. It's being recommended by a lot of court systems. It's being asked for in reunification processes. So we're trying to be really creative in making DBT available to a large group of people with a lot of you know, income, financial needs. So we do provide it sliding scale. We do some pro bono work for the shelters. People who come to us from the shelters, we do some pro bono work for them. And we strongly believe in the skill set and the value of DBT in people's lives. And we know that as a process, it can be very, very expensive in the community. And so we offer it at the lowest price, I think, out there. But we do offer it individually. And we have teen groups on weekends. Our approach for teens is a bit differently. And then our teens are divided into younger teens and older teens as well. So we really tried to tailor our groups to the needs of the people that are attending. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a question about the second skill set, the stress tolerance.
Yes.
I believe Phil mentioned that we're trying to take the harm out of the equation, and there were several instances. He talked about holding the ice cube. These sound like a little bit self-inflicting. Is that to shock us first, and then we go into a second phase of soothing?
Well, yes.
That's what I don't understand,
and
how
I
those
think
two
that
correlate.
So often in moments of distress, people who come into our DBT group are already involved in self-harming behaviors. So it's a step down to go from cutting where you need 6 stitches to holding an ice cube. You're getting the adrenaline rush, the same endorphin response, without doing actual physical damage. So it's one of the responses.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you heard of the butterfly program?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that when you were saying that, when she was saying
Yeah.
that, it reminded me of the butterfly program,
Yeah.
and it's like, I like that
Yeah.
for people.
Right.
It's almost like graduating from the ice cube to the butterfly.
Right. Right. And so
What is that?
Yeah,
I'm
what
not
is
familiar with that.
so it's a totally not harmful. It's more of an emotional, cognitive process of envisioning.
If there's a scar from cutting so much or something, then instead of always just seeing the scar, you would take markers or whatever, or if you got the
Draw a
money,
picture.
and draw a picture of a
Get
butterfly.
tattoo.
Or yeah, if you got the money, tattoo
Yeah,
over it,
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah.
But so the butterfly is kind of a reminder of
Growth as opposed
Yeah.
to
Okay.
scars.
Right.
So.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm a recovering self-harmer. The whole marker thing with the red, I don't particularly, do you guys recommend that?
No.
That seems triggering to me.
No, and I don't think that, I'm not sure, those things, I was a little,
That kind of caught me off guard. I was like,
we don't,
that would be.
actually, I can't think of a distress tolerance group that we've ever brought that up to.
Because we've done the,
But we've done the rubber band.
They've heard the rubber band.
Sometimes in individual therapy, some people have recommended the markers.
Okay, yeah, because that just makes me want to,
some is because with self-injury, they need to see the red instead of, it's not just
Right.
the physical cutting, they need to see the red.
And everybody has a different response, and so the importance, I think, of DBT is the fact that while we have these basic skill sets, we really try and design and help people find their own approach within the skill set. So nothing, it's really staying in the gray area. There isn't a black and white way of doing DBT either. It's incorporating a different way of thinking and a different approach that is slower, more mindful, more neutral, more in balance. We often talk about going to the neutral zone in distress tolerance. It's often too much to ask that someone get to the place where they're feeling good. We say, let's go to the neutral zone, as opposed to an extreme, because it's sometimes unrealistic for someone to go from being really upset to being happy, glad. That's not going to happen. So we talk about going to the neutral zone.
I never promised you a rose garden.
Yes, right. It's true.
The first psych book that I ever read at 13.
And we try to be very clear that you get from DBT what you put into it. You can come to a group every week, but if you're not practicing your skills during the week, you're not going to make the gains that you could make. We have people who are their third go around. They'll do the 24 weeks and come back. We have people coming back for the third time around. And so for an adult to go through the whole program, it's 24 weeks. It's 6 weeks for each skill set. And so we have people coming through who on their third go around because they just find
addicting.
Supportive.
We're addicted to DBT.
Awesome. And what a great skill set it is, and how valuable it is.
Radical acceptance every single day.
Absolutely.
Can you just take one skill?
Oh yes, we're not.
Will you will you have that scheduled out somewhere? Or?
Well, right now we're in emotion regulation, and we generally we start we start with mindfulness, but people come in. You can come into the beginning of any of the skill sets. We don't necessarily, the way that we present it, you don't have to take them in order. We've had a lot of people come in during interpersonal effectiveness and then come back to mindfulness the next go around. But we don't allow people to come in the middle of a 6-week group. You start the 6-week group, you run the 6 weeks through. And so, but people will come in all phases.
Do you do like an evaluation with the person, kind of talk to them until you kind of know like where they need to be in the, do they have to do the full 24-week or?
No, it really depends. As I said, we have some people who will do some of it individually and some of it in group. It really depends on what your needs are. We consult with all people generally before they join groups. There's some people, who have really been looking for a DBT group. Maybe they're court ordered. Maybe they need to finish DBT in order to get their children back. We have all of those sort of situations going on, and that's why our we offer it individually for people who want to do individual skill sets. But we really believe in the approach that we've developed. Most DBT groups, they run, they're 8-week long, and you run 2 weeks for each skill, and then they start over again. We have found this approach is a bit more effective. We like spending 6 weeks on a particular skill set. We think it really gives you an opportunity to get grounded in that skill set before you move on to a different one. But we haven't seen any difficulty from someone starting in emotion regulation and going into interpersonal effectiveness and then coming back and picking up mindfulness at the end. So it really,
Do you have two people that, in the group, or one person?
Phil and I always co-facilitate.
Co-facilitate.
There's generally both of us, and we have, we don't have an all-female or all-male group. We generally have co-ed groups. We have couples who come to group. Well, couples will come do interpersonal effectiveness together.
Is dialectical, is that the medium to conduct electricity? Is it because you're going from negative to positive? Is that like you're trying to change the?
No, dialectics, it's dialectical. Dialectics were developed by the Greeks. It's a philosophical idea that Socrates would use when he was discussing with his students. They would ask a question and he would go to the other extreme as a way of developing the answer. So it's really about using opposites and moving from that black and white area to gray, and that's what the idea of dialectics are all about. They've been around for a long
So he was
time.
bipolar also.
Just think of the term dialect.
Yes, it's been two-sided, yeah.
And in electronics, the dialect is actually something that separates charges, not something that
Yeah, it's like
conducts
an
it.
insulator.
Yeah.
You can put the transformer right inside the oil.
One thing that's important to me is where you say navigate the grays. Well, value systems can be black and white. I mean, there is good and there is bad. I mean, those are dichotomous. I mean, there's no getting around it. It's good, it's bad, in my opinion.
And there are some things that probably that's very true for, but we find that there are very few of those.
Like child molestation, there's good
Exactly.
and there's bad, and I'm not going to tolerate
Right.
child
Exactly.
molestation.
Right,
Right.
I'm very firm
Right.
about that. I'm not going to go
I
gray
don't care
on
for
it.
prostitutes.
Well, that's
Right.
That's yours.
So, but
Yeah, I don't.
but remember,
I don't know if anybody else thinks they're good, you know, but maybe
That's
somebody
your
does.
thing.
but DBT is about taking your value system and making sure that you stay true to your value system. Because if you're not true to your value system, you're going to be really uncomfortable, and you're going to find that whatever you try to do is not going to sit well with you. So we don't discuss individual values. We just ask people to take a read on their own values, understand their own values, so that
But
they
if I'm
can't
talking
in
to
conflict.
somebody, if I'm talking to somebody and I say, I don't care for prostitution,
It would never
and-
come up in DBT.
well, then that person says back to me, well, that hurts me that you said that. I want you to apologize. What would you do in that case?
What would I do?
As a counselor. As a counselor, what would you say to that person?
I would probably say it sounds like it's really important to you so say it again.
I would say to somebody, I don't care for prostitution.
Okay?
And that person would say back to me, that hurt me that you said that. What would you say in a counseling situation to both of us?
Why would I have the two of you together?
In a group session?
Yeah, and yes. See, in a group session, we're not going to get into war stories. DBT is a skills training
No, but
set.
if somebody in the group, I said, I don't like prostitution, I said it.
It's not relevant to the group.
No, it wouldn't be relative to the
Well,
group.
I don't care, I said it. I mean, it might not be relevant.
They just,
And I
She
would-
wants to an answer, because this happened, and she
Oh,
wants
okay.
an answer to what she should have said to this
You
lady.
just apologize.
And in
You say,
turn-
I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. I don't
Yeah.
Why
appreciate
should I-
prostitution, but I don't want to hurt your feelings as well, so I'm sorry
Well,
that
I
I hurt your
said-
feelings.
That's excellent.
That's very good.
I like that.
Yeah.
That works.
You
Yeah.
didn't,
Well,
you didn't
I
want
don't
to hurt
know.
her
I mean,
feelings,
that's
it's
what I
just your
need to
opinion
learn
about
then,
prostitution.
because-
Yeah. I don't mean to hurt your feelings.
I don't even feel like I have to respond to that.
See, a validation,
That's, I mean,
if we were in interpersonal effectiveness, we would teach a validation. A validation just says, I recognize your position is different than mine.
Yeah, exactly.
right, but she asked me to
Your
apologize. to
comment, ma'am, your comment is actually judging somebody, the way you said it, if I was a prostitute, or if I didn't have the same view as you, you judged the person, you disvalued who they are.
Well,
By
that's my
saying that.
opinion, and I don't think prostitution is good.
I know, but
Period.
that's what I'm saying.
It's not.
Your values you're putting on someone else.
No,
That's
it
what
isn't.
that's
It's not.
We haven't got enough time for
Well,
all
I
the
have a
questions.
question.
Lindsay got a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you accept the Apple Health, the Apple Health, insurance?
Washington State.
Washington State,
Yeah.
DSHS.
We don't bill any insurance companies. We provide our service on a sliding scale, and we'll provide you with paperwork that you can turn in and get reimbursed, but we don't bill any insurance companies.
Okay, well, I'm broke, I'm poor. Actually, DSHS, I'm not very like, so how, and the sliding scale, how much would I
That would be
ballpark?
Well, our high rate, you know, is $30 a session if you, our low rate is $5
$5 for the couples counseling?
per session. Well, we would negotiate with each person based on, but we really try to provide services at rates that people can afford, but we also have to make a living.
Mhm.
So, and I know that we've been offered contracts with the state, and we haven't,
Okay, thank you so much.
kind of debating.
Because my friend has a,
Tell them to get a hold of
partner
us.
who does the same thing, and I think they'd benefit from being in the same PMT class.
Oh, and we
Yeah.
often do couples.
Yeah, because our group doesn't allow couples to be in the same group, and it's just like,
Right, we have found just the opposite. We've had several couples go through DBT together, and we found it to be very effective.
well, nothing
Parents
probably
and
get-
kids doing it as well.
Yeah, well, probably nothing would get done in the group, because we're kind of troublemakers.
We probably fit really well into ours. So, any other questions?
Anybody
Can I
else?
ask, just real quick, just make sure I'm clear, you know, it doesn't matter so much the particular order that we take the skill sets in,
Yes, we don't think
but you're
so.
not gonna jump in 3 weeks into
Right.
distress tolerance, or we
No.
would need to wait till
Yes.
the end of that
Yes.
session, right? And then
Right,
start into
start
the
with the next one.
Okay.
Yeah, we're currently in the middle of emotion regulation, and so our interpersonal effectiveness is our next one. If we had enough interest, we'd start another group up. If we had 4 to 6 people, we'd start another group.
Maybe we should pass out an interest sheet.
Well, actually, that's what that is.
Oh, this
Yeah,
is,
we're-
okay.
Yeah, if you're interested, you could just tear off the bottom half of that and let us know.
Group of things.
So are the 4 sections really siloed like that, or is there a suggested order? Is there any concepts taught in one that are built upon another?
In Linehan's model, you start with mindfulness. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. There are some models that start with distress tolerance and then go into mindfulness, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. A lot of them are starting now with mindfulness, then doing distress tolerance and emotion regulation and but because they're skills, we haven't found any difficulty in people taking them with whatever order they just happen to come to us. There's a lot of overlap, and so there are a lot of things a lot of concepts that we cover over and over and over again, but with a slightly different perspective. And we'll always spend a little bit of time on mindfulness, no matter what skill set we're in, because there's the idea of being able to stay focused on the present and not be judgmental towards yourself or others is a recurring theme. And so that will always come up.
So that skill you use throughout all the other classes?
Yeah.
They kind of are like symbiotic, they just go back and forth.
They are. But those are very important concepts. The idea of staying focused on the moment and being non-judgmental. Yeah. And the wise mind.
the circles.
the wise mind comes back. We do wise mind a lot, so.
Can you give an example of a mindfulness technique or exercise or something? Is that possible, or?
Yeah, one of the things, when we start out all of our groups, no matter which, we start off by doing what we call, we do an internal check. So I will ask people to just take a moment and using in their head single words, identify some of the feelings, thoughts that they're having. So they do that, you do that for maybe 20, 30 seconds. And then I ask people to move from that internal focus to do a body scan. And I want you to pay particular attention to muscle groups. I ask you to do things like, what does your butt feel like on the chair? But then what does the chair feel like against your butt? And you know, what do your feet feel like in your shoes? But what do your shoes feel like against your feet? So really kind of a very mindful approach to body scan. And then we'll go into, now I want you to shift your attention out of yourself into your environment. I want you to pay attention to the air around you. You know, what's the temperature? How does the air move? What are the sounds that you hear? Keeping your eyes open, what are maybe some of the things that you see? And then we go from that into our 4 square breathing. We talk about eating mindfully. It's literally, you know, as you're eating something, what is the smell? What is the texture? All of the components of eating. We teach people to shower mindfully. A real interesting mindful showering exercise is to be willing to take the temperature from hot to warm and from cold to warm, cold to warm. And being mindful and noticing the difference is if the water gets cool, how long does it feel cold, and when do you notice that it becomes less cold? Even though that, you know, so there are a lot of different kinds of mindful exercises that we talk about. We talk about the non-judgmental stance a lot, and really that discussion of how difficult it is to suspend judgment and self-criticism, and how often we get involved in that when we're in moments. You know, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, and the first thing you do is, what a jerk. Well, that's very judgmental.
They are a jerk.
We would ask you
That's
to
the reality.
we would ask you to think opposite and say to yourself, that person must really be in a hurry.
After you call him.
You know, so but it's really, you know, the mindful
Which I
approach
just
would be
did.
to jump when you notice yourself being judgmental, to go to the opposite, to get your brain to think what the opposite is. And so finding that balance.
It's almost like, think like, what would Jesus do in this situation? I mean, I'm not bringing Christianity, but I would
more Buddha than.
Yeah, okay, Buddha. Okay, that's a good one, because it's
So,
a little more. Yeah, it's like, that's a really good way of putting it. Like, instead of going after that person and giving him the finger, and then he takes out, of course, his pistol. But, yeah, that's what it could escalate to. You're right.
And we ask people also to, you know, to be willing to look for the exception. So it's not unusual for someone to make an all or nothing kind of statement. And so then we challenge them to find one exception. You know, an all or nothing statement might be, well, you know, killing is wrong. No, this is really loaded. But then the one exception might be if someone has my child in their hands, I might kill them. You know, so we simply just ask people to look for the exception. And it's simply just thinking that there is an exception helps you step out of that all or nothing thinking. Just recognizing there may be an instant where this isn't true. That sort of thing. It's just a challenge. It's challenging your thinking. It's a purposefulness. We say that living a DBT life is a purposeful way of living your life. It's not going helter-skelter without paying attention. It's really being purposeful. It's slowing yourself down enough to live with purpose.
Isn't there had anything to do with that book that was real popular about the purpose life?
I don't know.
Okay, because that was the
The
big
thing is that-
Oprah thing. You know,
It's true, but the thing is that these are not new concepts.
No, they're not.
They're really validated concepts that have been proven
To work.
effective in a lot of different ways. You know, that mindfulness is a very Eastern tradition, very Buddhist kind of approach.
Yoga.
And so, Marcia, you know, who is bipolar herself, developed this skill set based on years of working with lots of mental illnesses and finding bits and pieces from a lot of different perspectives and putting them together, and that was where her skill was, is really finding and putting these skills together in such a methodical way. And so we have lots of worksheets and lots of homework, and we look at chain analysis, do a lot of chain analysis. You know, where's your vulnerability, where are your triggers that lead to behavior that's not effective? And so we go through that chain analysis as well.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have to thank you.
Very
Yes,
good.
thanks so much.
That's great.
Good,
I think
good.
a lot of people will probably
Good.
take away some good things and maybe
think so.
sign up.
Yeah.
Also, we have the group on second, third, and fourth Mondays. We have our meetings for people who have
Yeah, no, I'm glad you
diagnoses
can- you
and
take
people who
compliments
support
well,
people
too.
with diagnoses.
No,
Also, we're starting a new group.
You take compliments well. No,
It's for supporters only. And I can't remember what night it is, but
You just need to
Thursday.
connect,
Thursday night, that's right.
via, the website or email, and we'll give you the information because it's just for, family and friends.
Family and friends. Thank you for coming, everyone. Don't forget that little box back there.
Also donations.
Thank you very much.